Lesson 70 begins by saying, in the previous in-class activity, you discovered that the education category in the federal budget has increased by more than 80 billion over the previous 19 years. So pause and ask some people around you, what are some reasons that the education budget might have been increased? Get a good discussion going, get some thoughts, and jot down some ideas. Some possible reasons that it might have increased could include inflation. It could be to help people by providing funding for training during a recession or to increase grants because of tuition increases. Today, we're going to look at in this lesson, and by the end of it, you will understand that claims and hypotheses may be adjusted based on new evidence, and that you'll also be able to analyze data in spreadsheets and graphs to compare changes in categories. And we're going to look at that we can revise a claim or hypothesis based on new evidence. So in our activity, in our in-class activity on question 2, it says, in the in-class activity 7C, you calculated an absolute change and a relative change in the education, national defense, and net interest categories. So with this absolute change and relative change in education, national defense, and net interest categories, you have them, we got them from this Excel spreadsheet, which is inside of Quero, inside of our resources. But then they go on to ask that we do the same for the total federal outlays category. They ask us to go back to 7C and add a new row for total federal outlays to this table and then complete the following questions. The questions are going to include calculating the absolute change for total federal outlays and calculating the relative change for total federal outlays. So just to clarify, I've gone to the spreadsheet, and where it says here, total federal outlays, where I've got the green rectangle highlighted, the total federal outlays in 2000, you see the number 1788950. Remember, this is in millions, and we can either write the word million at the end of this, or we can add 6 zeros. Either way, it would end up being pronounced 1,788,950,000,000. So we're going to take that number, the 1788950, and either put million behind it or 6 zeros. That's going to go in the chart that I'm about to show you, but I also wanted to go on over here and find 2019 for total federal outlays, and that's where you see the 4,448,316, and that would also be pronounced 4,448,316,000,000. So you're going to need to write this number with 6 zeros behind it or with the word million. So the screen that you now see includes the answers to question 2. So double check that what I was just saying is what you now have written down for this bottom column that says total federal outlays. So I'm now looking at the questions for part A and part B that say calculate the absolute change, calculate the relative change, and then compare. So I'd like you to hit pause and go practice these without looking back at the directions, and then unpausing to come back and see if our answers match, are they the same, and what that looks like. So I'm going to let you pause. And so now we're back. So looking at this, it's asking us to calculate the absolute change. And so absolute change is going to mean we need to grab one of these numbers, the ending number, minus the beginning number. We ended in 2019. We began in 2000. When we subtract these two numbers, we're going to get something like 2,659,366 million. Or if you want to write it with the zeros, 2,659,366,000,000, and we would pronounce it almost $3 trillion for our absolute gains, and it is an increase. So that would be for part A. Part B is asking for the relative change. And so for the relative change, we can be lazy and we can just start with the number 2,659,366 and the zeros, because we're going to take the absolute change and divide it by the starting number. And our starting number is coming from here, where we started in our time. And I'm going to use all of these zeros. And this is where you got to get used to your calculator. You've got to know some math rules that allow you to remove zeros to make this a little bit simpler. And then if they're wanting it in a percentage, which we are, then you'll need to multiply it by 100. And it ends up being about a 1.4865, blah, blah, blah. When you multiply it by the 100, that gets to percentage. And then depending on where you're being asked to round it to, which could be the tenths or the hundredths, I'll start with, let's round it to the hundredths. That would be 148.66%, or it could be, if we want to round to the tenths, 148.7%. Either way, make sure that you are really understanding how to calculate absolute and relative change. Part C then says, compare your answer to Part B, to the relative change in the education category. What, if anything, does it tell you about the changes in the United States budget priorities? And something you might want to jot down is that the education budget increased 154%, while the total budget increased 148, almost 149%. Since the education budget grew at a higher rate, it seems to have taken up a larger portion of the federal budget in 2019 than in 2000. So then it says, okay, let's create a new row on our spreadsheet. This is number 3, that shows the percentage of the total budget that is allotted or allocated for education. So I'm going to switch out and I'm going to go to the spreadsheet. So this is a really good time for you to also stop the recording, go grab the spreadsheet and follow the directions that it just said. When you're finished with what you have for 3A and 3B and possibly 3C, then go ahead and hit the unpause button and start again. That would be called the start button, and start again, and we'll look at what our answers are and compare from there. So again, go on over to the Excel spreadsheet. So what they were asking was for us to create a new row in the spreadsheet that shows the percentage of the total budget that's allocated for education, the percentage of the total. And they want us to look at what was going on for education in 2000 and in 2019. So having said that, and having gone to this Excel spreadsheet, I'm going to go down here, and at row 39, I'm going to ask it to insert a row for me. I'm going to go ahead and insert another one. But down here, it says create a new row. So I'm going to say percentage allocated to education. And I'm going to play around with this because I did this by hand, and now I'm going to do it in the spreadsheet and double check my work. So my total federal outlays is in B35. So I'm going to jot down B35. And I always feel like I'm playing bingo when I'm doing this with all my B7, well, here we go, B6. I'm going to grab B6, and I'm just playing around. Actually, I don't want to do this in 2015. I'm going to scroll way back over here to 1941. And I'm going to grab B6, and I want to divide it by B35. And I want to turn it into a percent. So I need to start by saying equals. I want to take B5 and divide it by B6 and divide it by B35, and then tell it, okay, multiply it by 100. And so I can see what was going on in 1941. And so almost 12% of the budget in 1941 was spent on education. Now I'm going to do my little, let's drag this over and get some answers all the way across to the end of this chart, which is approximately ending at 2025. Well, I already calculated part A by hand, and so now I'm going to go double check my answers. So it was asking me back here in year, let's see, the first one was year 2000. It doesn't tell me where to round. So looking at the screen, it's 2.97-ish. So you could write 2.97%. You could put if we round to the tenths, it's going to bump us to the hundreds, to the wholes. So you could put 3%. So a quick double check that I think that my answer I think my answer is correct. And I was actually just looking at the wrong one. Sitting in the 2000 now, well, look at that. That's almost 3% or 3.0%. So it looks like in 2000, we're sitting at 3%. And then my other part was to go look at 2019. And so looking over here at 2019, let's see if my calculations match. And sitting here, I've got 3.07. So I could write down 3.07% or 3.1% or 3%, and because it depends on where I round. But part B says create a graph. And then it wants us to talk about some interesting features of this graph. So I'm going to go over here and click on 39, the whole row. And I'm going to click on insert at the top and then recommended charts. And then I'm going to click on the recommended charts. And so I am hoping that you all can see what I see, that I see this percentage allocated to education. And it's kind of interesting how they've got the horizontal axis, but if it's starting in 1941, it would be good if I added that comment to my chart to say that 1 is 1941. And then it goes on from there, and I would have to keep adding. And so then if I wanted to make a comment on part C, it says something like, in 1941, we had almost, or had 11 from, sorry, y'all, we had from, in 1941, the 11, more than 11% of the budget was what we had allotted or allocated for the federal budget to education. I'm going to scroll back over here and the chart goes away. But then in 1942, it dropped very drastically to 3% of the federal budget, and could be due to the United States entry into World War II. Education was a fairly small part of the budget during the 40s and 50s, but it was gradually increasing. And it made a large jump in the 60s, and it could be because of the space race. And then since the 1980s, so let me go back over here to my chart, and let me see if y'all can see my chart. Looks like you can. And so having said that, looking at this chart, let me scoot over just a tad. You see it where it's trying to increase, and then there's a drop, and then a little bit of an uptick. And adding these years at the bottom too, 1941, it shows you that since the 1980s, the education budget has hovered between 2 and 4% of the total budget. So you're literally going to write some comments of what you're observing, but definitely note that in 1941, we were very, gave a lot to education in the budget. And then now we are right where we are right now, or about where we are right now, has gone down drastically. Moving on to question 4, it says perform a similar analysis. And for the similar analysis, they want us to use the national defense category to basically wash, rinse, and repeat and do the same thing. Create a new row and put the national defense in there, and then look at its amount for the total percentage of the budget for 2000 and 2019, and then do the chart and do a comment. So that is the remainder of our lesson, that we're going to now do this for our national defense. So I would pause the video here. Let me get rid of this chart. Whoops, it doesn't like what I'm trying to do. Let me do this there. So I would pause the video here, and go do question 4 on your own. This is very good practice. When you're finished with your part, come back and let's compare answers. So starting here, I have already got a new row going, and I'm going to call it percentage allocated to national defense. I want to go ahead and do my calculations by hand first. I want to go grab the information from 2000. I want to grab what's going on at B6 for 2000. Again, I'll scroll over here to 2000. And on 2000, I am going to go up here. And in the year 2000, I'm going to grab education, the amount spent on, the amount spent on national defense. I'm going to take that number and divide it by the total federal outlay in 2000. I'm going to multiply by 100, and I'm going to set that number aside, and then I'm going to go do that for 2019. After I've done those by hand, I'm going to come back over here, and I want to do it inside the Excel spreadsheet. But now, instead of taking the number for B6, I want to take the number that's sitting in cell B4. So I'm going to ask it equals, let us take what's going on in B4 and divide it by what is still going on in B35, because that's the total budget, and then multiply that by 100. When I do, I get 47%. Wow. Back in 1941, 47% of the budget was going for national defense, probably because of World War II. I'm going to go ahead and grab that little bitty square, drag it all the way over here to 2025, let go, and it'll populate everything. And then I can double check what I had already done by hand. So when I did this by hand, I got that in 2000. We are about 16.5% of the total federal budget outlay going towards national defense. And then when we get over here to 2019, we're at about 15% of the budget going towards the total federal outlay. That answers part A. Well, we already did it by hand, but there's our double check on the Excel. So I'm going to do another graph. Again, this is good for you to pause, go do this by yourself, and then come back and watch the directions. But I'm going to go insert recommended chart, and this beautiful chart pops up here. And wow, look at where we were in the 1940s. Look at where we are in our present day. And so having looked at that, I would make some personal observations there. And then on part C, you could write something like, during World War II, the vast majority of the budget was dedicated to national defense. It dropped off during the late 1940s, but during the 1950s, it picked up again, which could have been because of the Korean conflict. The percentage of the budget allocated to national defense has declined fairly steadily since then, and there was a slight uptick in the 1980s under President Reagan. So this concludes our lesson 7D. And now go look at your calendar or your online support program or your LMS, your learning management system, see what is due for this week.